Emily, what's on your radar?
Well, according to a Sunday statement from Senator Rob Portman, a hefty proposed cash infusion for the IRS is maybe getting shifted from that bipartisan infrastructure bill to the reconciliation one. Democrats are hoping dynamic scoring of the measure will help them claim their legislation will pay for itself. Now, that's a separate issue from the practical question of whether this proposal is a moral use of taxpayer money. The disagreement over IRS funding features two perfectly reasonable arguments, at least when they're made in good faith. Evidence suggests audits of high-income owners are decreasing substantially and that low-income individuals are disproportionately subjected to them. Citing a 2019 ProPublica report, the Center for American Progress wrote last month, quote, "The IRS has said bluntly that its recent audit priorities reflect that audits of low-income filers are cheaper and easier for the agency to conduct. Auditing low-income filers requires fewer resources and manpower than audits of wealthy individuals who are able to employ batteries of tax lawyers and accountants to contest audits and litigate against the government," wrote CAP, further noting that skilled and experienced agents needed to audit the wealthy are being cut due to budget concerns. CAP also contends the trends have had negative implications on communities of color, as disproportionate share of EITC claimants, earned income tax credit claimants, are Black and Hispanic. So Joe Biden now and congressional Democrats want to throw more money at the enforcement agency, currently perpetuating this alleged racial and socioeconomic disparity. A lot more money. Asked about that $80 billion figure, which would be spread out over a decade, by the New York Times, President Obama's IRS chief, John Koskinen, I should say his infamous IRS chief, John Koskinen, replied, "I'm not sure you'd be able to efficiently use that much money. That's a lot of money." He suggested an increase of about $25 billion over a decade. Instead, Koskinen, it must be emphasized, by the way, is a vehement critic of the budget cuts to the IRS and also a very active proponent of increased funding to the agency. So according to the Times, from 2010 to 2018, quote, "The IRS's annual budget declined by 20% and its staff declined by 22%. Funding for enforcement activities fell by nearly a third. Last year, the IRS operated on an $11 billion budget. The CBO has projected that a $40 billion increase in funding in the next decade could increase revenues by $100 billion. Some estimate Biden's proposal would raise north of $1 trillion. So perhaps the $80 billion is part of negotiations, and Biden ultimately expects to meet somewhere in the middle. But that it just got dropped, apparently, according to Senator Portman, at least for now, from the bipartisan bill, suggests they may genuinely be shooting for a pretty massive increase. Like Koskinen, former IRS Commissioner Charles Rosati recently said, quote, "If you just scale up what they're doing now, it's so inefficient that you're never going to get a big result." This is actually kind of what CAP was getting at when complaining about the agency's perceivably disproportionate targeting of minorities and low-income earners. It's incompetence and it's inefficiency. What's the IRS's incentive to use the money more efficiently now? According to the Biden administration, more than half of the projected $700 billion in revenues would come from, quote, "requiring banks and payment system providers to report annual flows in and out of the accounts," as the Wall Street Journal put it. This sort of would function as some kind of deterrent, according to the plan. This money wouldn't just come from the wealthiest households, but from a broader cross-spectrum, including small business owners who underreport income, the Journal added, noting, "Moreover, the IRS would need to digest the large new data stream and use it to determine who should be audited. Quote, "Each of those iterations requires the absorption and the processing and the editing of that information," a former CBO official told the Journal. "In the past, the IRS has not quickly gotten through that first stage." Republicans, by the way, were motivated to cut the IRS's budget because it was using its weight to target political enemies during the Obama administration, and that can easily go the other way. The bureaucracy is a very powerful bipartisan weapon. So here's what the Treasury Department wrote in a press release this spring. Quote, "The IRS has made clear that it needs additional resources to pursue costly tax evasion. These are not easy cases to resolve," the release continued. "The average investigation of a high-wealth individual takes 2 years to complete and often requires the IRS to commit substantial resources." 2 years! Why does that average investigation 2 years to complete? Because, as CAP noted in its call for a bigger budget, our tax code benefits rich people who can hire others to take advantage of loopholes and stonewall these investigations with lawyers. Remember when Joe and Jill Biden saved as much as $500,000 simply by routing their book and speaking income through an S corporation? That was after the Obama-Biden administration tried to outlaw such maneuvers. And even if that had happened, Biden could still have undoubtedly found another way to save some money on all that income. So what Biden is proposing now is the facilitation of a vicious cycle. Pour more money into the IRS, tweak the tax code with projections that will finally make wealthy people pay what they owe, then continue adding layers to the tax code for their donors to hide in. Giving the IRS a 70% budget increase is a pretense for politicians to campaign on that measure while doing very little to actually create and enforce a fair tax system. They want you to think that giving the bloated IRS more access to everyone's information is a meaningful step to cracking down on rich people so elites can continue getting away with hiding in the cracks of our gargantuan tax code. They're tricking us into taking more and more of our money as a pretense to grow the enforcement bureaucracy while leaving the real solutions untouched. Ryan, Biden also has proposed some things like cracking down on the capital gains loophole. We've seen him suggest that the tax code can be fixed in various ways, but the tax code can't really be fixed because no matter what, the rich people in this country can continue hiring lawyers, they can continue hiring accountants that will help them hide their money some way, somehow. And so I'm curious if you agree, find this to be a vicious cycle wherein it's like, yeah, absolutely, the IRS does need more money to audit high income earners and to get what could be called that lost tax revenue. Absolutely, it's way more costly to do that, and we shouldn't be facilitating or perpetuating a disparity racially, socioeconomically, 100%. But giving more money to the IRS while not also fixing the tax code seems to just be a total vicious cycle and a great way for bureaucrats and for politicians to continue pulling the wool over everybody's eyes.
I would think of this more as somebody who's very badly wounded. The IRS is bleeding right now. And what this would do is it would stop the bleeding. And then once you stop the bleeding, then you can get some other doctors in there and you can see if you can heal the patient and get them walking again. But if you don't fix the bleeding, then they're going to bleed out and they're just going to die.
Yeah.
One quick addition to the scandal from early in the Obama administration. There was an IG report that finally looked into that in like 2017, and they found that there was no directive from the Obama administration and that the IRS. This was after Citizens United, and this flood of groups started registering as 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofits. And they suspected that there were a bunch that were actually doing political activities. So one of the things they searched was if you had Tea Party in your name. But they also searched, do you have Occupy in your name? Are you affiliated with Acorn? Do you have Progressive in your name? Everybody with Progressive in their name. Everybody with medical marijuana, even. Okay, Occupy, they're probably doing some political stuff, but probably not electoral. Progressive? That's probably electoral. Maybe you can go ahead and look at them. Medical marijuana, that could be anything. And the IG said that this was inappropriate, that they shouldn't have searched the names of a group, that just your name should not get you flagged. So it was more that Republicans had looked at this as an opportunity to cut the IRS budget.
Absolutely true.
And then just went for it. So I think if you can stop the bleeding and it takes billions of dollars and you're going to make it back on the other end, I say go for it and then deal with the complications in the tax code.
Before we wrap, I just have two quick points. Firstly, yes, that IG report is really interesting. And it is also true, however, that they targeted way more conservative groups than they did on the left. And that's sort of like not worth relitigating, I think, at this point, because you're right. It was an excuse to sort of cut a department that Republicans always want to cut. At the same time, however, I would say the stop the bleeding thing, and the point I was really trying to make, it's absolutely true. Stop the bleeding. But then we continue to be told that the bleeding needs to be stopped. And where does that cycle end? And that's what, when we're talking about $80 billion to the IRS, 70% increase over 10 years, that's a vicious cycle. That's like when in the world are we going to be stopped being told that the bleeding just needs to be stopped?
Right. It's right. They need to do this, but they also cannot pretend that this is the only thing that they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Team Rising will join us next, so make sure you stick around for that.